It was called a taco. That was the name on the frame. And the model you wanted was called the Burrito, or the Tacquito, or, if you were on a budget, the Frijole. And if that sounds like someone was making fun of you, they weren't. Because the man who named those bikes was one of the best off-road racers in America, and the machine he built under that ridiculous name was the first thing with an engine that you ever called yours. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. It came in a box. That's the part that separates a taco from everything else you owned as a kid. It didn't arrive ready to ride. It arrived as a frame. Steel tubes welded and painted in a color so bright it hurt your eyes, with 2 wheels and a seat and absolutely nothing in between. No engine, no chain, no throttle cable, no instructions worth reading. You bought the frame from Staten's catalog or from the local dealer for somewhere around $100, and then the real work began. You went and found an engine, a Briggs & Stratton off your father's lawnmower, the one he didn't know was missing yet, a Tecumseh from the neighbor's snowblower that hadn't run in 2 winters, a Clinton 2-stroke you found at the swap meet for $12 wrapped in a greasy newspaper, smelling like old gasoline and possibility. You carried it home in your arms like a baby, you set it on the garage floor, and you stared at that frame and that engine and the space between them, and you started figuring out how to make them one thing. You bolted the engine on yourself. You ran the chain yourself. You fabricated a motor mount out of angle iron because the bolt pattern didn't match. You rigged the throttle cable yourself, a bicycle brake cable probably, routed through a housing you bent from a coat hanger. You drilled holes that didn't line up on the first try or the second. You stripped a bolt and had to drill it out and retap the threads. And you didn't know what retapping meant until your father showed you, standing behind you in the garage with his arms crossed, trying not to smile. And when you pulled that starter cord for the first time and the thing actually caught, when that little engine coughed and shook and settled into an idle that vibrated through the frame and into the soles of your sneakers, you had built something, not assembled, not unpacked, built with your own hands from parts that didn't belong together, in a garage that smelled like motor oil and sawdust and summer. That was Southern California in the 1960s. That was the world that taco came from. Not a factory in Ohio or a showroom in San Jose, a sun-baked parking lot in the San Fernando Valley where a man named John Steen sold go-kart parts and chemicals out of a catalog and wondered what would happen if he put 2 wheels on a frame instead of 4. What happened was the biggest mini bike manufacturer in America. What happened was a machine that showed up in every driveway, every vacant lot, every dirt trail between the foothills and the freeway. What happened was a generation of boys who learned that if you wanted something bad enough, you could build it yourself out of parts that nobody else wanted. The taco had no rear suspension. The early models had no front suspension either, just a rigid fork that transmitted every bump and crack and pebble straight through the handlebars and into your wrists. It had no front brake. The rear brake was a scrub pad that pressed against the tire and worked about as well as dragging your sneaker on the ground, which is what you did anyway. It had no lights, no horn, no speedometer, and no muffler worth mentioning. It was, by every modern standard, a terrible vehicle, and you loved it more than anything you had ever owned. You loved it because it was yours, not your father's, not your brother's hand-me-down, not something that arrived complete from a store with instructions and a warranty. You built it. You chose the engine. You adjusted the chain. You figured out that the idle was too high because the throttle cable was binding where it went through the frame, and you fixed it with a piece of rubber hose you cut from the garden. Nobody taught you that. You taught yourself. And every time you fixed something that was broken, you understood the machine a little better. And every time you understood it a little better, it felt a little more like it belonged to you. You rode it in cut-off jeans and sneakers, no helmet, no boots, no gloves, no pads, no adult within 3 blocks who knew where you were. The exhaust pipe ran 6 inches from your right calf, and if your leg touched it, and your leg touched it, everyone's leg touched it, you got a burn that lasted 2 weeks and a scar you can still see if you look hard enough in the right light. You didn't care. You wore that scar the way a soldier wears a medal. It meant you were in the club. It meant you had been somewhere and done something and survived it. Every kid who rode a taco had the same mark on the same calf, and when you saw it on another kid at the swimming pool, you nodded at each other like veterans. The trails you rode were not trails. They were gaps between buildings, dry creek beds, dirt shoulders along roads that nobody maintained, fire breaks in the hills that the county had cut and forgotten. You knew every rock, every root, every patch of sand where the back wheel would slide if you hit it wrong. You knew the jump. There was always a jump. A dirt ramp some older kid had built out of plywood and cinder blocks, and you knew exactly how fast you had to be going to clear it and exactly how much it would hurt if you didn't. You cleared it 3 times out of 10. The other 7 times were the stories you told for the rest of your life. The club had no membership card, it had no meetings, it had no rules, no fees, no adult supervision. It was every kid in the neighborhood who had a mini bike or wanted one, and it met wherever the sound of a small engine carried on a Saturday afternoon. You heard it 3 blocks away, that unmistakable high-pitched buzzing that could only mean one thing. And you got on your bicycle and pedaled toward it as fast as your legs could move, because wherever that sound was coming from, something was happening. Someone had gotten a new engine. Someone had figured out a new trail through the construction site behind the school. Someone had welded a banana seat onto a Frijole frame and was claiming it could do 40. Someone was trying to jump a drainage ditch that everyone said was too wide, and you wanted to be there when he either made it or ended up standing in 3 feet of brown water with a taco on top of him. That was the world, your world. A world measured not in miles, but in how far a tank of gas could take you, which wasn't very far because the tank held about a quart and the Tecumseh drank it like water on a hot day. But it was far enough to feel like you were somewhere else, far enough to feel like nobody could find you, far enough to feel, for the first time in your life, like you were in charge of where you went and when you went there and how fast you got there. And when the cops came, and the cops always came because a dozen small engines screaming through a residential neighborhood on a Saturday afternoon was not something that went unnoticed, you scattered down the alley, through the gap in the fence, across the field where the tall grass hid you in your taco like a foxhole. Some kids killed the engine and coasted behind a garage. Some kids just opened the throttle and outran the cruiser on the dirt paths where a car couldn't follow. The officers would circle the block once, slow down where the tire tracks crossed the sidewalk, shake their heads and move on. If they caught you, if you were the slow one, or the unlucky one, or the one whose engine stalled at exactly the wrong moment, they were usually decent about it. They'd yell loud enough to scare you, loud enough to make your stomach drop, and then they'd say the same thing every cop in every town in America said to every kid on a mini bike in 1968, push it home, son. And I mean push. You'd nod, eyes on your sneakers, hands on the handlebars, and push that taco down the sidewalk like a kid walking a very loud, very disobedient dog. You'd push it all the way to the corner. You'd look both ways, not for traffic, for the cruiser, and the second it was out of sight, you'd fire it up and be gone before the echo of the starter cord faded. The man who started all of this was not some businessman in a suit who saw a market opportunity. John Steen was a racer, a real one. In September of 1964, he was in Erfurt, East Germany, behind the Iron Curtain in the middle of the Cold War as part of the first ever American team to compete in the International 6 Days Trial. The ISDT was the Olympics of motorcycling, 6 days of the most brutal terrain the organizers could find. And the team riding for America that year included Bud Akins, the stuntman who performed the motorcycle jump in The Great Escape, and a man named Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen, the biggest movie star on the planet, the king of cool, and John Steen rode next to him. On a Triumph 500 through the rain and the mud and the forests of East Germany, with McQueen carrying the American flag at the opening ceremony in a packed hall under a portrait of the East German leader. The team was leading after day 2. Then McQueen crashed. A local rider blocked his path and his Triumph's forks folded under the frame. Bud Akins broke his leg. The dream was over. But John Steen came home. And he took everything he knew about racing, about what makes a frame handle, about what makes an engine run, about what a machine needs to feel right in your hands at speed, and he put it into a mini bike that cost less than $130 and could be built by a 13-year-old boy in his garage on a Saturday afternoon. He called it a taco. He named the models Tacquito and Burrito and Frijole. He made the frames in colors so bright they looked like candy, and he sold them by the tens of thousands out of Southern California to every kid in America who had ever seen an ad in the back of a magazine and thought, I could do that, I could build that, I could ride that. Motorcyclist magazine called Taco the biggest and most randomly named mini bike manufacturer of that era. They said that if you were alive in America in the 1960s, you probably had your first two-wheeled experience on a rigid-framed, lawnmower-powered mini bike, and most likely it was made by Taco. And then Japan showed up. Honda looked at what Taco and Rupp and Bonanza were building, looked at the kit frames and the lawnmower engines and the no-brake, no suspension, no muffler machines that American boys were riding into ditches every Saturday, and they built something better. The Honda Z50, the Kawasaki Coyote, real suspension, real brakes, real engineering, a machine that started on the first pull and didn't shake the fillings out of your teeth at full throttle. And here is the part that still stings 50 years later. They didn't just build something better. According to the people who were there, they copied the designs. Honda looked at the Taco and built the Z50. Kawasaki looked at the Taco and built the Coyote. They took what John Steen had created in a catalog workshop in Southern California, handed it to an engineering department with 100 times the budget and 1,000 times the manpower, and produced it cheaper, faster, and in quantities that no American garage operation could ever match. By 1967, John Steen had stopped making Taco mini bikes. He started selling Hodaka's Japanese machines. The man who had raced against the Japanese in East Germany was now importing their products. 2 years later, he sold the company to Suburban Gas. Suburban Gas had no idea what a taco was. They had no idea what it meant to a 12-year-old boy who had spent 3 Saturdays in a garage with a wrench and a dream. They let it lapse, they let it die, and by 1973, the Taco mini bike, along with every other American-made mini bike, was gone. Every single one of them. Rupp, Bonanza, Fox, Lil Indian, Bird, Cat, all of them. An entire American industry that had put engines under boys for a decade, that had taught a generation how to wrench and ride and fall and get back on, that had turned vacant lots into racetracks and driveways into workshops and Saturday afternoons into the best hours of your childhood, wiped out by the same Japanese manufacturers who had copied their ideas in the first place. And the strange thing is, nobody noticed. There was no headline in the newspaper, no announcement on the evening news, no going out of business sale where you could pick up a frame for half price. The Taco just stopped being in the catalog. The dealer just didn't have any more. The ads in the back of the magazines were replaced by Honda ads and Kawasaki ads and Yamaha ads, and nobody said a word about what had been there before. It was as if an entire industry had been erased, quietly, completely, the way a footprint disappears in sand. But here is the thing about a taco. It didn't care about any of that. It didn't know it was supposed to lose. It didn't know it was a cheap, rigid-framed, no-brake death trap with a lawnmower engine and a name that sounded like a lunch order. It just sat there in your garage waiting for you to figure out what was wrong with it this time and fix it and ride it again, and you did. Every Saturday, for years. If you still have one, a frame, a wheel, a rusty engine plate that says Steens on it, you know what I'm talking about. It's not the machine you miss. It's not the speed, because honestly, it wasn't that fast. It's not the comfort, because there was none. It's the feeling of standing in a garage at 13 years old with grease on your knuckles and a wrench in your hand, and the knowledge that you built something that runs, that you fixed something that was broken, that you figured out something that nobody showed you how to figure out, and that if you twist the throttle and let go of the world for a few minutes, the only thing that matters is the next turn and the sound of a small engine and the feeling of wind on a face that hasn't started shaving yet. The man who gave you that, the racer who rode with Steve McQueen through the mud of East Germany and came home and built the most ridiculously named minibike in American history, deserves to be remembered. Not as a businessman, not as a manufacturer, as the guy who looked at a lawnmower engine and a steel frame and a 13-year-old boy and saw the same thing in all three of them. Potential, raw, unfinished, no brakes, no suspension, ready to ride potential. They named a mini bike after a taco, and somehow it was perfect.